Family laughed at my business over dinner, I let them talk. Then I built an empire. When I shut the door, they begged me to come back. My whole family laughed at me at dinner. So I invited them all back, to my mansion. What I told them at the end left the room in total silence. During Thanksgiving dinner, my family made fun of my small business. How's that going? Still broke yet? They let out a big laugh. I said nothing. They discovered that I was yesterday. Even now, occasionally, I can still hear the laughter in my ears. There was more than simply laughter. It seemed nasty, piercing, and sharp, the kind that permeates a space. Last Thanksgiving, that is. With a turkey in the middle, candles flickering softly, and the sound of football resonating from the living room, the table was crowded. It ought to have been comfortable, it ought to have been familiar. Rather, it was like being in a harsh, chilly spotlight. When my cousin Jenna snorted so loudly that she nearly knocked over her wine glass, I was halfway through telling Uncle Brian about my business, which I put every hour, every cent, and every part of myself into. She snarled, adding further venom to the phrase as if it were a sickness. "How's your little business going? Still broke yet?" another person asked. I didn't even look to see who it was. It was followed by thunderous laughter. My dad muttered a little laugh. In that pitying, disappointing manner, my mother shook her head. I said nothing. I gave them a tiny, fragile smile and let them enjoy themselves. But something changed inside. The goal was not to disprove them. I wanted to prove myself correct. For them, I was not going to succeed. In spite of them, I was going to succeed. I recall trying to ignore the knot in my gut as I stood in the kitchen after supper, scraping leftovers into a plastic container. From the living room came the sounds of football and laughter. My brother James was making a lot of noise about how I probably sold 3 t-shirts in a year. When he said, maybe next year he'll afford real mashed potatoes, everyone laughed so hard that someone gave up. I lowered my head. However, an odd event occurred. I assume no one could hear my father, my aunt, and a few other people conversing in the den through the partially closed door as I went to put the dishes away. I heard it at that point. Aunt Linda murmured, "Poor kid," with a tone of phony worry. "Still chasing rainbows?" Dad gave a grunt. If he had any sense, he'd quit that fantasy and get a real job. Wendy's is always hiring. They all laughed. By the time he's 30, he'll still be living in some drab apartment dreaming about his big break. "It's almost sad," said another voice, possibly that of my uncle. The words that hurt the most were then spoken by my mother, who is a kind and loving person. "Well, at least he's harmless. I mean, it's not like he'll ever actually succeed enough to embarrass us." With my hands shaking around a plate I hadn't even known I was holding, I remained motionless. They weren't merely skeptical of me. They thought I would fail. They needed me to fail, which is worse. They would be safer if I remained the underdog, the idealist who never achieved anything. I ventured to think I could create something better, but it was simpler than acknowledging they had chosen a life of mediocrity and resentment. Without saying goodbye, I took my jacket from the peg by the door, put the dish carefully in the sink, and left the kitchen. I hardly noticed the cold air biting my face outside. I had just one idea racing through my head. Never again. I would never again ask for their blessing. I would never again justify myself to those who were hoping for my downfall. I opened my laptop that evening and spent a considerable amount of time staring at the screen while I sat by myself in my small, drafty flat. I could either fall under their incredulity or use it to shape me into something unstoppable. I went into my business plan, made all the necessary changes, tightened it up, and plotted out every crazy, unachievable goal I could think of. After that, I started working. And I continued. After Thanksgiving, the first 6 months were terrible. I worked out of a small 1-bedroom apartment with plumbing that shook like a dying engine and barely functional heat. My hands were cramped from typing, packing, and hustle, and my eyes burned from too many hours of staring at a screen. I usually woke up before daylight and fell asleep after midnight. I didn't have an impressive startup tale. Angel investors weren't present. No loans from relatives. Just me, a used printer, a laptop that was half broken, and a heart full of obstinate blazing defiance. There were mornings when I would sit at the small kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and bills, and wonder what on earth I was doing. I would distrust myself more than I would be insulted by my family. Maybe they were right. Maybe you are just chasing rainbows. Maybe you are just nothing. Then I would hear my mom's voice again. At least he's harmless. I mean, it's not like he'll ever actually succeed enough to embarrass us. And that would rekindle the fire beneath me. In the least spectacular way imaginable, the pivotal moment occurred. A random online order I packed one night while dozing off, a customer I had all but forgotten about, and a social media tag for my little business. A picture, a post, and a few complimentary remarks regarding the caliber of my work. There was nothing viral about it. Not a million likes. No quick stardom. However, when I woke up the following day, I had 12 new orders, which is more than I typically receive in a week. 24 then. Then 60. I had to hurry, get more supplies, work more quickly, and update my website. However, the impetus was genuine and palpable for the first time. It also brought new people. Actual persons. Not relatives. Not doubters. Individuals who supported my ideas, believed in what I was creating, and wrote notes that said, "You're doing something special. Keep going." It's done me, honestly. How strangers could be kinder than everyone in my family. And among all of the orders, shipments, late nights, and unrelenting labor, I came to the following realization. Blood is not family. Family is loyalty. Respect is family. Family is unconditional affection that isn't conditioned or judged. Brick by heavy brick, piece by piece, the weight I'd carried my entire life, the urgent desire for their approval, began to crumble. And I could see the path ahead clearly for the first time. It would take a long time. It would be solitary. However, I was going to have it. It took place on a soggy Tuesday. Life-altering events seldom wait for ideal weather, which is funny. I received an email as I was bent over a pile of packaging orders at my kitchen table. Initially, I nearly erased it. Opportunity, the subject line, sounded like just another spam message. However, I opened it for some reason. It came from Caroline Walters, a boutique owner who I had never heard of but who seemed to have a sizable fan base in the independent sector. She wanted to discuss a cooperation after discovering one of my goods through that small customer post months ago. A large one. Supplying her nationwide chain of businesses. I read her words repeatedly as if they were written in a different language while I sat there blinking at the computer. She thought the branding was fantastic. She thought the quality was fantastic. She thought the story was fantastic. Additionally, if I could quickly scale up, she wanted to highlight my whole product line. I didn't think twice. I responded in 5 minutes, possibly coming out as impatient yet unconcerned. Later that afternoon, she called me, and her voice was enthusiastic, professional, and kind. She inquired about the size of my procedure. I told the truth. For now, I informed her, it was just me. She chuckled. My family's chuckle is one of happiness and admiration rather than one of derision. Her words, "That's even better. People love authenticity." I had a draft contract in my inbox by the time the call ended. I had contacted a small fulfillment company before the end of the week to assist me with production management. My business, which they ridiculed, was closing a deal by the end of the month that would put 6 figures in my pocket before spring. It seemed unreal. I realized my life was changing as I stood in that same small kitchen, the cheap linoleum floor sticky under my bare feet, the rain beating down on the window. I ought to have been overjoyed. However, all I experienced was this peculiar, silent calm. The air wasn't punched by me. I refrained from screaming into the night. I simply grinned slowly and wearily and muttered to the empty room, "You were wrong about me." They were wrong. Every single one of them. The following year flew by, filled with new contracts, restless nights, and hard-won development. I was no longer merely getting by. I was doing well. The small company they made fun of grew into a real one with staff, investors, and actual momentum. I just sat there and gazed at the screen for a long time the first time I wired 6 digits into my savings account. Not because I found it hard to believe. No, I anticipated this. Because I secretly knew that I didn't feel the way I had anticipated. I felt no vindication. I didn't feel victorious. I simply felt liberated. That's when I had the notion. I had no desire for vengeance. I desired resolution. I had no intention of showing up at their home with a bank statement in front of them. Number, it would be too simple. It's too loud. I looked too much like the child they believed me to be. I chose to let them come to me instead. First, I purchased a huge house. I mean, a mansion. Situated on a hill, the expansive windows captured each sunset. Marble floors that reverberated as you moved. And enough space to lose yourself in. I told myself this each time I passed across those enormous, deserted hallways. You built this. No one can take it away. My cousins used to make jokes about my never being able to afford anything more than a second-hand Honda, so I filled the garage with that kind of vehicle. A Maserati in deep black. A Jeep that has been customized. A vintage Mustang, simply because I could. I didn't make any online posts about it. Avoid taking selfies in front of fast autos. No toasts with champagne. I said nothing. Then I sent out a group text 2 months ago. Easy. Straightforward. Family gathering. Sunday. Big news to share. The invitation was accepted by everyone. Naturally, they didn't. Deep down, they still considered me to be the loser they could comfortably feel sorry for, despite the fact that curiosity is a strong narcotic. They had no idea that their jaws would drop to the ground before they had even rung the doorbell when they pulled up that twisting road. They were unaware that they were not the subject of the major news. It was all about me and the new life I had created in their absence. On the day of the event, the air was clear and the sky was so clear that it appeared to have been painted. Even though I got up early, I wasn't at all anxious. I walked about the home in silence during the morning, straightening a painting here, adjusting a vase there. Little pointless activities to kill time. The Maserati shone in the driveway like a black mirror in the sunlight. Beside it, the Jeep and Mustang stood with pride. By midday, my hired caterers were preparing a lavish buffet in the garden, complete with silver cutlery, white tablecloths, and buckets of chilled champagne. I didn't do anything. I just waited. The first vehicle arrived at precisely 1 o'clock. Jenna, my cousin, was there. I saw the mansion as soon as she got out of her dirty minivan while sporting her go-to fake fancy sunglasses. The hesitancy. She gave her husband a brief, piercing look as though to inquire, "Are we at the right place?" A second vehicle pulled up. Then another, and yet another. Their expressions were a mixture of bewilderment and incredulity as they spilled out into the driveway one by one. I couldn't hear Uncle Brian muttering something. In an attempt to appear disinterested, my brother James hummed softly to himself. My mother, who always wore a look of bored superiority at family gatherings, was motionless on the front steps, holding her purse tightly like a shield. For a long, beautiful moment, no one spoke. Then Jenna burst out laughing, too loud and brittle. She exclaimed, "Oh wow," as she adjusted her shades. "You, renting this place or something?" I gave a charming smile. "Not renting, bought it last month." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "You're kidding," another person remarked, half laughing, half panicking. They had never been unsteady before. They weren't accustomed to me being in control. The marble floors shone like water beneath the chandeliers, and I pointed to the open doors. "Come in. Make yourselves comfortable." Like visitors to a large museum, they cautiously made their way inside, avoiding contact with anything. As they moved through the spacious living room, the open kitchen, and the glass walls that looked out onto the well-kept backyard, I observed them from behind. They were rushing to change their stories, and I could see it in their expressions. The desperate search for an explanation that would allow them to maintain their sense of superiority. Their faces were plastered with fake smiles. "Wow," exclaimed my aunt. "This is, really nice. Good for you." Uncle Brian added, "Yeah," giving me a too firm pat on the back. "We always knew you had potential." I simply nodded. Let them speak. Allow them to tangle into knots. I no longer required their approval, never again. I wasn't here to make an impression. I came to bid you farewell. The catering staff presented small works of art, known as hors d'oeuvres, on silver trays. Bites of smoked salmon. Little Wellingtons made with beef. Tiny tartlets that appeared too good to devour. My family walked around seeming like they were at ease. A bit too loudly laughing. Praising the furnishings, the vista, and the tasteful design. It was simple to see beneath the surface though, as their eyes darted around, attempting to solve the problem they were unable to solve. How? When? Did you win the lottery? Was his claim of struggle a lie? They desperately wanted this to be untrue because if it were, it would mean that all of their assumptions about me and themselves were incorrect. Always the most audacious, James drew me away from the champagne table. "So seriously," he replied with a grin. "How do you swing all this? Who's paying you, or is it some kind of like crypto thing?" I gave a faint smile. "I built it," was all I said. He blinked. "Built what?" "My company. My brand. Everything." He gazed at me as if I were speaking a foreign tongue. "Constructed, not talented, not bumped into, constructed." James laughed, this weak trembling thing that didn't quite reach his eyes, and stroked my shoulder like if I were a child. "Man, that's wild. Good for you. Really proud of you, bro." He wasn't, not for a moment. My mother looked at me from the opposite side of the room. She smiled at me, the tense, strained smile she used to wear to church when she pretended everything was just right. I gave a courteous nod. Today there would be no yelling. Don't argue, no charges. Just a single, tidy cut. I looked at my watch. It's almost time. I strolled to the middle of the room, where the marble floors were bathed in golden light from the chandeliers, and I raised a glass, not for a celebratory toast but for closure. The room instantly fell silent. Every discussion ended in the middle of a phrase. All of them looked at me expectantly and eagerly. I finally got their undivided attention after all this time. I let the silence to linger a bit too long while I held the glass loosely in my palm. I felt the pressure of their gazes on me, but I wasn't bothered by it for once. I was in charge of the room for once. I casually cleared my throat. I said, first of all, in a cool, collected tone, thank you all for coming. A couple of courteous nods. Uncomfortable foot shuffles. I'm sure you're wondering why I invited you here today, I said. And the truth is, it's not to brag. It's not to show off. With a gentle clink that sounded almost like a bell toll, I placed my glass down on an adjacent table. I brought you here because I owe you something. They became alert, feeling something. Perhaps they believed that I was going to give them a share of the pie. Perhaps they believed that I was going to tell those who had always supported me about my accomplishment. I allowed that dream to linger for a single, cruel heartbeat. Then I gave a chilly, final smile. When I said, I owe you a thank you. Because without you, none of this would exist. Whispers? Smiles of confusion. My voice was as steady as ice as I continued. I appreciate all of the insults you have ever directed at me while you assumed I wasn't paying attention. I appreciate you making fun of my dreams. I appreciate you placing bets against me, having doubts about me, and demonstrating unequivocally that your definition of family was limited to your personal comfort. James stirred uneasily. No one dared to interrupt Jenna as she appeared to be about to say something. I leaned in a little and took a breath. You taught me something valuable. You taught me that real family isn't blood, it's loyalty. It's respect. It's standing beside someone when there's nothing to gain. A rhythm. And because of that lesson, today is not just a celebration of what I built, it's a farewell. They were slapped across the face by the words. I'm cutting ties, I remarked in a low voice. After today, I will no longer be part of this family. Quiet. Complete and utter quiet. Then the roar burst forth like a dam bursting. But we're family, exclaimed Aunt Linda. Jenna stumbled. You can't be serious. James moved forward with a somewhat terrified expression. Hey man, come on. Don't be dramatic. Even my normally calm mother appeared to have taken a hit to the gut. She opened and closed her mouth, but no sound emerged. I simply grinned, genuinely this time. Free. When I said, I wish you the best. And I hope someday you realize what you lost. I turned after that. I then turned to go. I didn't turn around. I could hear the frantic cries behind me, the begging voices becoming softer with each stride. Wait, please, don't do this. We didn't mean it. You're making a mistake. I continued to walk. Beyond the marble flooring, beyond the chandeliers that gleam, past everything that meant nothing at all and once harmed me. I arrived at the front door. Stopped. Then I shut it behind me without thinking twice. Like the last ending of a chapter, the hefty thud reverberated throughout the house, not only of that particular day but also of my previous existence. The environment outside felt different as the door snapped shut behind me. My face was stroked by the cool breeze. The driveway was bathed in a gentle golden glow as the sun began to set. There was silence. Calm. For a moment, I just stood there and took it in. Not a sound. Not guilty. Don't second-guess yourself. My former existence was behind those walls. The days of begging for bits of affection and pursuing praise were finally, totally ended. And while I stood there beneath the open sky, I came to the following realization: the quiet wasn't meaningless. It was liberty. There was nothing that I owed them. No justifications. I'm not sorry. No pardon. They had already made their decisions. Finally, I had done the same. I wasn't escaping them for the first time in my life. I had no intention of proving anything. I just kept on going, without them. Months have passed since that day. And what do you know? I've never regretted it. The phone calls. The written word. After a while, they ceased. Initially, the messages were hostile. Then guilt trips. Then frantic excuses. None of them were answered by me,